Welcome to this week's Finance at 5, where we deep dive into the current events shaping the Australian real estate market. In today's episode, we're going to look at how potential rising interest rates could shape the market. We're going to see how you could tackle the housing crisis head on with an election coming up this year. And we're going to see what the future of the property market could look like, fast forwarding a bunch into the future. That's it. Let's jump right in.
Welcome to the Buying Your First Home podcast, your personal guide through the Australian housing market. Here we tackle the big questions and the small details that come up when buying your first home. From financial prep to finding the right neighbourhood, we're here to ensure that you've got all the knowledge at your fingertips. So let's take the first step towards unlocking the door to your new home.
So Simon, starting from the top, market performance and housing supply, how rate hikes could shake up the market.
Yeah, so it's a report that's just been published by CoreLogic, and it's kind of looking at what's happened since the rate hikes that we've had over the past 2 years. And it's interesting to take a look at the figures. So national home values have actually seen a modest increase of 2.8% overall since April 2022. But that's a pretty far cry from the 31.7% growth that we witnessed just 2 years prior to that. And so interest rates, when they rose, there was a pretty severe impact. There was a 7.5% drop in values between May 2022 and January 2023. But since then, the market has bounced back. So there's been 15 consecutive months of increases, which is why we've seen this modest 2.8%. So it was a big drop and a bit of a rise back up.
Yeah, and the recovery hasn't been uniform. Perth is riding a huge wave of growth with house prices surging 25.7%. Meanwhile, Hobart's feeling a bit of a pinch, experiencing an 11.2% drop. Sydney and Melbourne are caught in the middle. Sydney's eked out a 0.4% gain, and Melbourne's suffering a 4.2% decline, with a lot of the laws changing there around property investment and land tax.
Absolutely. And there's ups and downs, different places, but overall, 43.6% of Australian suburbs reached a record high property value in April 2024. So capital city suburbs in particular, they're showing pretty good resilience. So nearly 50% of capital city suburbs across the entire country reached a peak last month. I mean, there's a few examples here as well, like Perth. 97.3% of these suburbs in Perth were at a peak last month. Adelaide at 90%, Brisbane at 85%. On the other hand, some of the other capital cities aren't really doing that well in comparison. We've got Hobart, none of them are at a peak last month. Melbourne, 1.5%. And Sydney's kind of in the middle there, with the 30% of the suburbs reached a peak last month. So a bit of a mixed bag for some of these cities.
And this is where all the different markets experience different cycles. Starting with Brisbane, we've obviously experienced huge population growth and interstate migration, which is driving demand. Housing remains relatively affordable compared to other major cities, and lower stock levels are really intensifying competition. I had an example of this just last week. A client of mine was making an offer on a unit in Yurong-Pili. He put a pretty reasonable offer of $780,000. It seemed pretty good considering, the last sale of an identical unit in the same complex sold for $680,000, $100,000 less 6 months ago. It ended up selling for over $780,000. So we've seen a massive jump in demand in that unit space in a really short period in Brisbane.
Yeah, and this is something we've talked about on other episodes about units becoming far more attractive as, houses become less affordable. So in a sense, it's not surprising to see this huge jump for units in the Brisbane market. I mean, moving on to Adelaide and Perth, I think these cities are also seeing strong growth for similar reasons. Adelaide has relatively comparable affordability, which attracts buyers, and low stock levels, tight rental markets. These are kind of the standard things that support home values. Perth, which has been the darling of the property market situation for the last year or so, it's still the most affordable of the major cities, and it's got strong population growth and tight rental vacancies.
Melbourne, Sydney, and Hobart and Canberra actually have had pretty big headwinds. So there's been weak interstate and overseas migration during the pandemic. It's obviously changed, and that could change again with some of the government policies coming up around migration. Affordability constraints have sort of held things back. If we're already at peaks again, it could slow down some of that growth, which is probably a good sign if you're looking at getting the market. And high supply of listings in some areas means that there's more properties and probably fewer buyers. So there's less competition, softening out the market there.
Yeah, and in Melbourne, with these changes, the way the Victorian government is handling investors and tenants, they're restricting rent increases, there's rental reforms. This makes it less attractive for investors. But it's kind of actually good news. If you're looking to buy a house there as a home buyer, it means you're not going to be competing with investors and often you are competing for the same types of properties if you're a first home buyer. So it's kind of, in a sense, a bit of good news if you're looking to buy in Melbourne.
But if you're on the other end, what does it mean for sellers? If you're wanting to sell and you're trying to make a profit in properties, is now a good time? Well, that's where the pain and gain report comes in. So let's have a look at this. It's one of CoreLogic, RP Data's reports, and it deep dives into the analysis of profitability in the housing market and see who's kind of laughing all the way to the bank and who's feeling the pinch when it comes to sale time.
Yeah, I think this report's a really good one to take a look at, especially if you are worried about buying a home and you think, what happens if the property market crashes and I'm going to have to sell it at a loss? This type of report actually gives you some real data, some real figures to look at and say, how likely is it that I'm going to lose money on a home? And the national snapshot that they just published, of all the homes sold recently, 94% made a gain. And the median gain of that was $310,000.
Wow.
Yeah. On the other hand, only 6% of sales actually lost money during the sale, and the median loss was $40,000.
Yeah, it is a good one for transparency because you're right. Like if you look at the stock market, you go on, Wall Street Bets on Reddit, and some people are making crazy amounts of money, some people aren't. This is a good one for transparency and to give you a bit of an understanding that if you take a long time frame, which you're going to come back to the next point, it can help. But if you're running which type of property is likely to yield a profit, based on the previous data, the answer is houses. So a solid 97% of house resales made a gain compared to 88.2% of unit resales. But the good thing is that gap is narrowing.
Absolutely. Yeah. As you mentioned, the thing about property, and one of the best things you can do to avoid making a loss, is to make sure you hold on to the property for an appropriate amount of time. So if you're going to look for a quick flip, buy a house and sell it within a year or two, there's a much higher chance of losing money on that. So overall, the median hold period for people selling the homes was 9 years. And if properties that were sold within 3 years had a much higher rate of loss-making sales. So in other words, even if you're buying a home as an investment, or if you're buying it to live in, or whatever your reason is, aiming to hold that property for at least 3 years, and ideally more like 6, 7, 8, or 9 years, it's going to give you a better chance at selling at a gain instead of selling at a loss.
Yeah, it's the same when you're looking at areas. Regional areas actually proven to be more profitable than capital cities, with 95.5% of resales making a gain. Resource-based markets in particular have seen a pretty big decline in loss-making sales. So they're down 15%. We saw a lot of pain in there, 10, 15 years ago. It's sort of cleaned out. It's looking a bit better, but I'd still be careful if it's a one-horse town.
Absolutely. And along the capital cities, Adelaide is actually the champion of profitability. So 98.5% of resales made a gain there. Brisbane's not too far behind with a 97.9%. And Sydney's lagging a little bit with a 91.9%. Unfortunately, if you are looking to sell a property in Melbourne, that city is trailing the pack at the moment. So it has the second lowest rate of profit-making resales at the moment.
Yeah, so what this means, I guess, circling back, is that if you're planning on buying a home and you sort of worry, well, what happens if a lot of those markets at all-time peaks, like, am I going to lose money if I get in? Am I going to time it at the very worst time to buy a property? Well, based on history, based on some of those stats, it's a pretty high chance that if you hold the property long enough, you're not going to lose money. Like 97% of people in Brisbane sold their property or their house for a gain. Like, it's crazy stats. Like, if you get that in the share market, everyone will be buying in. But yeah, the main thing is that you need to hold on to it for a decent amount of time. If it's under 3 years, like Simon said, once you pay the stamp duty, the agent's fees, your interest holding costs, like, that's probably not a great decision based on this data, not just on an anecdote. So while the majority of these resales are profitable, it's also important to realize that the market doesn't take a one-size-fits-all approach. The type of property you own, how long you hold on to it, and where it's located makes a pretty big impact into you making money at the back end.
Yeah, but profitability isn't the only challenge facing the housing market. In our next segment, we're going to have a look at the thorny issue of housing supply, and we'll explore how government policies are impacting your ability to find your dream home. So there's this new benchmarking tool that's recently been launched by the Urban Development Institute. They call it the UDIA Housing Index. So what they've done here is they've essentially tried to combine a bunch of different data from different areas. So things about supply, construction costs, a whole bunch of different statistics just to give a single measurement. So the index baseline measurement is 100 points, which reflects the average performance across the 2019 financial year. And anything below 100 shows that demand is outweighing supply. Things that are well below 100 really shows that there's high costs that are affecting the market as well. Anything above 100 is kind of good news in terms of housing supply. So they've released this new index and they've backdated some figures, and overall, it's a pretty grim picture. So there's a significant shortfall in housing supply in relative demand in most states, and really Western Australia is the only exception.
Yeah, so WA is enjoying a relatively healthier balance with an index reading of 112. New South Wales and Victoria lagging behind at 93 and 86. And the performance is attributed to a bit of a combination of weak supply and skyrocketing costs. Queensland's at a stronger level of performance, reading 98, and some of the smaller housing markets of Tasmania are reading pretty poorly, at sort of 75, so they're not doing too well. But what's causing this housing shortage? It's a perfect storm of challenges, including the soaring construction costs that are making it increasingly expensive and scary to build a house. There's labour shortages that are delaying projects. People are getting put into some of the federal projects that are taking away labour supply, and planning bottlenecks that are creating bureaucratic hurdles. And to make matters worse, the industry needs a staggering 300,000 homes between 2026 and 2029 to meet national targets. And that's basically double what's being built now. It's insane.
Yeah, so for home buyers, this does mean fierce competition, rising prices, a shrinking pool of affordable options. And if you're renting, it's looking like soaring rents and a scramble to secure a place to live in. So, I mean, this index, it's a pretty grim news. And this housing crisis actually has kind of become a pretty major political battlefield. So both major parties are scrambling to offer solutions, but really are there proposals up to the task? I think we should take a look at, the political debate and see what they're doing to try and fix this.
Both political parties are offering a couple of quick fixes to try and sort of, band-aid things over. Peter Dutton wants to cut back on migration numbers to 140,000 per year and cap foreign student visas. Labor wants to do a similar thing. They want to cap overseas student numbers as well, but with a different strategy. With universities exceeding the cap, need to demonstrate how they're actually going to provide housing for the students. But are these policies going to change anything, or are they just a bit of a quick fix to sound nice?
Yeah, look, this is kind of like the migration myth. Reducing migration, it might temporarily ease some pressure on some parts of the housing supply. So when people migrate to Australia, they often start out by renting. So if you reduce migration, there will be less pressure on rental markets. But it's not really going to solve the fundamental underlying issues of why we have this housing crisis. And if anything, it could potentially make it worse. So decreasing migration could worsen the shortage of labor for construction. So we need more builders, more tradespeople to be able to build these houses for people to live in. If you reduce migration, we'll get fewer of them coming to help out. Decreasing student numbers can also cause problems as well. So universities actually need foreign students to remain economically viable. So if you reduce student immigration, then you're going to be looking at paying a lot more for university, or universities are going to shrink, and neither of these is really a good option. So no matter which political party you're talking about, none of them are really talking about and fixing the real structural issues here that are affecting our housing supply.
Yeah, the real issue is just a shortage of skilled builders and tradies, coupled with demographic changes like reduced household sizes, and it's created a bit of a perfect storm for inadequate housing supply. Australia has a lower than average number of dwellings per 1,000 people compared to the OECD.
Yeah, so the OECD is like a whole bunch of different countries, and Australia is really on the lower end. So we have around 400 dwellings per 1,000 people. The median is about 430-ish. Looking at a chart here, it's hard to tell exactly, but we're on the lower end of things, and that's not really good news. And compounding that, the demographic changes that we've had in Australia as well. So the number of people living in each household these days is about 2.5. So for each dwelling of any kind, there's 2.5 people on average. This used to be 2.8 in the mid-80s. And that 0.3 people, that doesn't sound like much, right? But that decrease is quite a lot. So if we increased the number of people back to 2.8, we would need 1.2 million fewer dwellings to satisfy the population. So it's actually a massive deal.
Yeah, they could potentially do tax incentives or other incentives to get more people living at home, living together, really. And also the change in behaviors, like post-COVID, there's more work from home. So, that spare bedroom that you might have previously rented out to a mate might need to be a home office. So it's reducing the rooms that you can use at home. And also because of some of the restrictions put during COVID, where you had to have a certain number of people per household, people wanted more space, it could reduce the lower amount of people per household too.
Yeah, so we've got a couple of issues there. The changing demographics, lower households, and then in terms of building more supply, we've got these spikes in building costs. So the government incentives, supply chain issues, state infrastructure projects, all of these massively strained the availability of labor and materials during the pandemic, and we're still seeing some carry-on effects from that. So, builders went broke, the number of builds decreased. So we're building fewer homes while we need more for people to live in. So that's the real issue here that we should be seeing addressed by the politicians.
Yeah, the real issue is we just don't have enough houses to fulfill the demand. So limiting the migration isn't going to fix that underlying issue. So increasing the supply of homes will actually make a difference, but that's a lot harder to do than just simply cutting back the number of people coming into the country. So that's why they're focusing on that side.
So yeah, as a voter and a potential home buyer, or even as a renter, it's really important, I think, to see through the political spin and demand real solutions that address the underlying causes of this housing crisis. Rather than just talking about simple quick fixes, I think we should be asking for policies that promote sustainable development, encourage innovation, and remove some of the barriers that are preventing us from building enough homes for everyone. So, medium density housing is still banned in a lot of local councils, which means we can't build more homes on less land. Those are the kind of changes that would make a big difference in terms of improving housing supply.
Yeah, but while this does go on, there is some good news if you're considering buying off the plan. So we're going through a bit of a solution from the CommBank and another funder there that can help home buyers get into the market. So in what is a definitely challenging housing market, there's a bit of a glimmer of hope with the CBA offering a bit of a solution to help you get into the market a bit quicker.
Yeah, imagine securing your dream home off the plan with just a $10,000 deposit. And that's what CommBank is offering in combination with a company called Coposit. So they're looking at trying to revolutionize the way that we buy off plan homes. And it's not just about making home ownership more accessible. It actually is also going to give developers a much needed boost. So if you're a developer and you're looking to develop a block of land, you need to show the banks that you've sold a certain number of off the plan homes to prove that you have a market for what you're building. So adding in this $10,000 deposit means that they'll be able to sell more off the plan projects to more people and get these projects off the ground quicker.
Yeah, that's right. Because off the plan can be challenging because as a borrower or buyer at the end, you potentially have to stump up a 10% deposit years and years in advance and just sit there and wait. Whereas this sort of helps you get in a lot quicker. So it makes it easier for buyers to commit to off the plan because you only need $10,000. You can set up a bit of a payment plan too, so they can help you get to that target of having your sort of 10% deposit in 2 years' time, 18 months, whenever the development's going to be finished, and you get in much quicker.
Yeah, and I think this is great news for new developments. We need this supply in the market. This is one great way to potentially add to that supply. And so if you have been dreaming of buying an off-the-plan home and you don't have that 10% deposit, this could be potentially a golden ticket. Obviously, with anything like this, any investment, you got to do your own due diligence, understand the risks and rewards, and choose a reputable developer, but it's well worth a look.
Definitely. Now, flicking back to the current market and trends, a couple of bargain buys, Simon. In April, there were some pretty affordable places. So a house in Russell Island, which is in Brisbane's Moreton Bay, sold for $220,000. It's pretty amazing, right?
Absolutely. It's an amazing price. This place was sold with a few caveats. So definitely it was a fixer-upper, had a fair amount of work to do to get it to a proper state. But if you are the type of person who loves to renovate, a great snap up for $220,000 to have a home that you'll be able to live in. There were some other pretty cheap sales across the capitals. Like in Adelaide, there was a $370,000 sale for a 3-bedroom house in Elizabeth South. Perth saw another $378,000 sale for a 3-bedroom home in Armidale. Sydney had a $530,000 sale for a home in Mount Victoria. And Darwin, $395,000 for a 3-bedroom home in Grey. So there are still a few bargains out there for home buyers. And
if you're up to unit living, you could find even more affordable options. The cheapest unit in April sold for $175,000 in Darwin. So as we covered before, it can be a good choice. It could be low maintenance, convenience, but there are trade-offs in terms of size, location, and you got to keep in mind that body corporate and strata costs, and if there's any issues with the building.
Yeah, these cheaper properties as well. I think the caveat here is that you're not going to be buying a perfectly built new home or a mansion or anything. There is going to probably have some compromises to make. But, I saw something the other day, which I think is really wise, is your first foot on the property ladder isn't the last step. There's a few more steps to climb, and getting in there and getting a home is, even if it has got some compromises to be made, I think is a great choice.
And finishing up, let's look at some future housing trends. So, Simon, I'm glad you brought the time machine. We're going to set our sights on the year 2124. In 100 years' time, what does suburban life look like? What kind of houses are we going to be living in? It's not the Jetsons. It's actually after that. The Jetsons was set in 2060. I had to check out. So I'm sure we're going to have bubble cars that come out of our briefcases. But what are some predictions of Aussie homes? What are people saying?
They're saying a few things. The first thing is that I think suburbs are here to stay. Suburban living is something that people love. And even in 100 years' time, that's probably going to be the case. Although these suburbs might look a bit different, probably more like a walkable community, tree-lined streets, tons of green space, and mixed-use developments that are kind of a combination of residential, commercial, and retail. Home design as well. They're saying that these homes aren't just going to be smart, but sustainable. So renewable energy sources, geothermal heating, modular designs. One of the experts thinks that basically you'll look at a catalog of different rooms from a factory and just plug them all together and build your home like that. Or even some biodegradable building materials. So instead of building a forever home, you might be building a, for the next 5 years, home out of fungal mycelium.
And what buyers want will change. So eco-friendly is going to be a pretty big priority. So imagine, super energy efficient appliances, water saving fixtures, and homes designed to sort of maximize all the natural light and ventilation coming in. So automation, everything will be automated, from lighting, temperature, entertainment. It'll all be there for you.
One of the most interesting things they talked about is, the ways of owning a home. So this traditional model of buying a title to a property and owning that home, maybe that's even going to evolve. You might have a membership or micro ownership. So you might essentially like having a gym membership, except for a place to live. So these kind of models could offer greater flexibility, affordability. It's possible you buy a membership to Aussie Homes and you could check into any home anywhere around the country. These are all potential ideas. There are a couple of things that they didn't mention, though. And I guess we're looking at real estate and property. You kind of think they're talking about homes and what things could look like. But what about the matrix, right? Like in 100 years' time, maybe we don't even need homes because we're just kind of plugged into a capsule and we just live digitally and virtually in a whatever space we want to be in.
My brother-in-law did buy a block of land in the metaverse, not too far from where Snoop Dogg is living. So let's see. All right, well, we've covered a lot of ground on the podcast today. We've journeyed to the future. Let's see how that works out. Hunted for bargains and seen some crazy quick sales and gains and losses.
We've seen how rate hikes are reshaping the market. It's creating both some winners and losers. And we've looked at really who's profiting from property sales. And the answer is almost everybody. We've had a look at the innovative solutions to buying off the plan, like this new $10,000 deposit scheme. And it's a lot to digest, but the key takeaway is clear here. Knowledge, as always, is your most powerful asset in this landscape. So make sure to stay on top of the market, listen in, and keep informed.
Yeah, and if you're feeling overwhelmed or not sure on where to go, if you're eligible, if you can buy a home, if you can buy a home in the future, hit us up at Hunter Galloway. We're a mortgage broker. We help home buyers across Australia. We've got expertise to help you through the home buying process. If you own an existing property, you can see if it's competitive or, look at your future investment needs. So hit us up. We can give you a free consultation at huntergalloway.com.au to help you on your home buying journey. Until next time, we'll see you guys later.